The state of the economy notwithstanding, 6 leading Tier 1 commercial banks in Nigeria have announced huge profits as well as mouth-watering dividends for the 2023 financial year. Arise correspondent Georgina Ndukwe reports.
In 2023, the Nigerian banking sector witnessed inflationary pressures, corrective policy measures and global shocks that resulted in regulatory changes and economic shifts. In spite of these factors, Nigerian banks seem to have profited more from the foreign exchange unification policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria. An analysis of the 6 banks audited 2023 results by Arise sister publication This Day newspaper shows that cumulatively, the 6 banks generated about 3.1 trillion naira profit before tax, a growth of over 216% from the about 983 billion naira recorded in the 2022 financial year. After tax, the bank's profit stands at 2.6 trillion naira, a growth of 224% from the almost 808 billion naira reported in 2022. The banks are Zenith, Access, United Bank for Africa, Guarantee Trust, Stanbic IBTC and Wema. In 2023, Zenith Bank upheld its position as the most profitable bank in Nigeria, followed by UBA and Access. Now let's break it down, beginning first with Zenith Bank. Audited results show its profit before tax at about 796 billion naira in 2023, a growth of 179.6% from the nearly 285 billion naira in 2022. For UBA, it was about 758 billion naira profit before tax in 2023, an increase of 277% from the 200.8 billion in 2022. Access Holdings announced 729 billion naira profit before tax in 2023, a growth of 334.7% from the 167.6 billion naira declared in 2022, to join the Tier 1 banks with over 700 billion naira profit before tax threshold in 2023. For Guarantee Trust Holding, the profit before tax in 2023 is 609 billion naira, an increase of 184.5% from the 214 billion naira reported in 2022. Meanwhile, Stanbic IBTC closed 2023 with about 173 billion naira profit before tax, a growth of 72% from the 100 billion naira in 2022. While Wema Bank declared a profit before tax of about 44 billion naira in 2023, an increase of about 193% from the 14.8 billion naira in 2022. To many Nigerians, the concern is how the banks are making huge profits in a challenged economy where the manufacturing sector, as well as the small and medium-scale industries, are in decline, and how the banks can plow their profits to help the economy. Georgina Ndukwe, Arise News.
Right, let's bring in economist Johnson Chukwu. He's the founder and CEO of investment banking firm Carry Asset Management Limited. Good to have you on Newsnight tonight. Well, I'm sure you listened to that report. Yes, shareholders will be definitely glad with this huge profit posting by 6 banks. But Nigerians are wondering, in a bad economy, how are the banks smiling to the bank?
Thank you, Ngozi, for having me. What I would say is that if you look at the performance of the banks, something is almost common among all the banks, maybe apart from Stanbic IBTC, and that is there's a huge component of what we may call foreign exchange income that had to do with the devaluation of the currency. So you saw it across all the banks, virtually, like I said, maybe with the exception of Stanbic IBTC, where the income they made from FX differential, that is marking their assets at current exchange rate, was actually the major propeller of the performance. When I tried to strip the revenues or the net profit before tax of the FS income, you realize that none of the banks would have made a growth in their profit by more than 100%. If you strip that of Access Bank of foreign exchange income, you will see a net profit before tax about 400 billion. Same with UBA. And if you strip that of GT Bank of the foreign exchange related income, their profit will come to about 220 billion. So the worst is even the First Bank. If you strip First Bank of the income related to foreign exchange, they will have a lower profit than they made the previous year. So reality is that the exchange rate was a major tailwind that propelled the growth we saw in the income of the banks.
Ways will continue into 2024. Recall the Central Bank of Nigeria only recently warned the banks from, dollar or forex-backed loans, for naira. How is that likely to affect things going forward for the banks?
Well, it will reduce the available collateral that the banks relied on to lend. But that's actually not the greatest factor that will affect them in the current year, that is 2024. The major factor is that we've seen appreciation of local currency. So the kind of exchange gain that they reported in 2023 will not likely repeat itself in 2024. And that's going to be the major factor. Like I said, if you strip the net profit before tax of exchange gain that most of them recognize in 2023, you realize that their profit level did not, none of them actually, the best performing banks would actually be Access Bank, Zenith Bank, and UBA. But the other banks were made marginal growth in their performance. I said with the exception of Stanbic IBTC. So this year, 2023, unless Naira devalues again, as it did last year. Remember that last year, at the harmonization of the exchange rate, dollar official rate was about 420 to 430 Naira to a dollar. At the close of the financial year, the exchange rate official window was 907 Naira to a dollar. So you had, for those who were holding dollar assets that were positive net dollar positions, they had to lock in, recognize their, revalue those assets at closing exchange rate. And that's why they reported the kind of profit. But that is not going to repeat. But as it relates to the directive by central bank that banks can no longer use dollar-denominated foreign currency assets as collateral for Naira loans, I don't think we have so much of that. What they basically want to do is make those people who are holding dollar positions and using it as collateral for Naira loans to liquefy those dollar positions and inject liquidity into the foreign currency market.
Now, let's look at the real sector and the manufacturing sector. Their fortunes continue to dip in the last number of years. And just like, we've stated, how exactly have the banks, helped the manufacturing sector and the SMEs, especially, that make up a huge chunk of the economy? Some would say about 80% of the economy. How do you think, or how should the banks help the real sector, the manufacturing sector, and what have you?
Well, because unfortunately, the reality of the ground is that the real sector of the economy are the worst off when it comes to banking credit. If you look at even the P&L of the banks for 2023, you saw a material increase in interest income, higher than the increase in interest income was much higher than the increase in average loans and advances, which simply indicate that the yield on those risk assets was higher than what they were in 2022, which means that the banks reprice their loans, and the banks are charging far more than they charged for the same volume of loans. So you had a marginal growth in loans, but a material growth, some of them more than 100% growth in terms of interest income. What that indicates that the banks are charging higher for lending. And and that has actually worsened this year, because if you look at what is going on this year, the central bank comes to the market and issues treasury bills at 21.12%, which effectively gives a yield of more than 23%. The banks have an option to, at the MPR of 24.75%, the bank have an option to keep their money with the central bank at 23.75%, because you have an asymmetric credit of plus 100 or minus 300. Or the banks have alternative to buy treasury bills at a yield of more than 23%. So in the alternative, the banks have to price in these risk-free returns in charging a risk premium on the lending to the real sector. So you go to the banks today, the banks are lending in the region of 30%, 35%. I heard a company that I'm involved in, say that the banks offer them loan, the bank offer them loan at 45% per annum. So if you are going to charge a small-scale enterprise an interest rate of 45%, how on earth can they break even? Chocolates of the manufacturing sector have a longer asset conversion cycle because before they buy raw materials and produce and sell and convert from cash back to cash, it takes more than 90 days. So it's impossible for a manufacturing sector, the real sector of the economy, to borrow at that current interest rate and still produce. So in reality, we're going to see a weakening, further depression in real sector productive activity because the real sector is suffering from multiple factors: high cost of funds, high energy costs, unavailability of reliable energy supply, and then low demand, low market demand.
Johnson Chukwu, some actually, link this huge profits on the part of the banks to round tripping. Do you agree that there's a level of round tripping in the banks that may have contributed to these huge profits?
Well, what I would say is that if I have to rely on the performance reported by the banks, there is no income here that is reflecting, or that you can say that this is where round tripping income was factored in. When we talk about round tripping, we know that I don't think the banks have the structure for effective round tripping, because it simply means you have to export dollar out of the country by paying for imports and then bringing those goods back to the country. For every import here, you have to open a Form M. And it's difficult for the banks to do that. I don't think that's the issue. But the banks had the benefit of holding positive dollar positions. Many of the banks that made this kind of income are exposed to the central bank under what they call currency swap, where the Central Bank of Nigeria borrowed dollars from Nigerian banks and gave them naira in exchange. And then those dollar positions, they had to revalue them at closing exchange rate for 2023. And that's part of the reasons why you had this kind of foreign exchange income that the banks reported. But in terms of what you talk about, I think that would be highly speculative for me to say that the banks are involved in round tripping, because these are fundamental criminal issues that if anybody is caught with it, the person should face the law. So it's not an allegation we can make casually unless they are proof or evidence that such thing occurred.
Last question. I mean, the central bank, the regulator of the banks, to what extent should the Central Bank of Nigeria be looking into the books of the banks to ensure that there's no, untoward behavior on the part of the DMBs?
Interestingly, the central bank, with the current level of automation today, the central bank had direct access to the bank's balance sheet, the bank's trial balance. The central bank is actually seeing on the closing balance positions of the banks. And that is why when the central bank wants to debit for cash reserve, the central bank does not need to ask the bank, what exactly do you have? The central bank has a record of total deposit liability to the banks on a daily basis. We've gone beyond the era where the central bank has to come physically with examiners to come and look at the books of the banks. The central bank basically has the technological tools to look at the balance sheet of the bank. So the key thing is that the central bank must have regulations that will make the banks behave in desired direction. And I think that is what we should focus on. Policy pronouncements will make the banks, because the banks are rational entities. And like I said, every business organization is a rational entity. If you create incentive for people to behave in a particular manner, they will behave in that manner. Like I talked about what is going on today. At Treasury bill yield of 21-23%, effective to yield of 23-24%, the logical thing to do is to look, why would I give my money to Ngozi, Aliebu, or Justin Chukwu, and then run the risk of a default when I can give their money to the central bank and get 24%? If I can't buy Treasury bills, I can as well put it under what they call the standing deposit facility of the central bank and get 23.75%. And that's the reality of the incentive now is for the banks to actually avoid lending and keep the money with the central bank and make maximum return at minimal risk.
Before I let you go, very quickly, I mean, these huge profits, 3 trillion naira, how should the banks plow back these huge profits, into the SMEs? Let's underscore that again, and the manufacturing sector in a way that the economy will benefit in the long run.
Well, the banks at individual level can adopt what they call impact lending, and they can set aside a percentage of their loan portfolio for the small and medium scale enterprises. They know that they're going to get the optimum return from those portfolios, but because of the impact of creating a growing economy, expanding the cake, and building entities that would ultimately become multinational entities that will now have the capacity to borrow higher. So the banks can actually say, okay, 20% of our total loan portfolio will go to the small and medium scale enterprises. We're going to price it at maybe 15% because ultimately we're building the institutions, the entities that will become big in the medium to long term and be in a position to pay us higher yield. Because if the economy is bigger, everybody will benefit from it.
Good place to leave it. Thank you very much. Johnson Chukwu, CEO, Managing Director of Cowry Assets. Thank you for joining us on Newsnight.